It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with Joseph Chilton Pearce. Joe has been writing and speaking about human development all over the world and for many years. He's the author of numerous books, including his national bestseller, The Magical Child. Joe, I often use the phrase, the intelligence of play. What is the relationship between play and learning?
They are certainly interdependent. You can't have real learning with the child unless they are playing. Real playing is how real learning takes place. You can have conditioning, kind of Pavlovian conditioning of his dogs or behavior modifications through other means, which we look on as very serious and which we generally call learning. But it's not learning, it's conditioning. Real learning takes place by what Maria Montessori would call the absorbent mind of the child, simply absorbing their universe, absorbing it, becoming it, and they do this through play. Play can be the most serious undertaking of a child's life. It is the most serious undertaking. They are completely entrained in play. Mind, the three parts of the mind, thought, feeling, action, the body, every aspect of the child's self entrains solely, focuses totally on the activity of absorbing their world, absorbing their environment. It's the most serious activity of their life because they're literally building their construction of knowledge of a world, of themselves, of the relationship between the two, and laying down all the foundations for the later forms of intelligence. And in all of that, play is the activity itself. So you have those two things. What we think of as learning is conditioning. Training is conditioning. But real learning is that state of play. We have to interrupt the child's real state of learning or play in order to bring about what we think should be their training and their conditioning.
If the state of play is the optimum state for learning and performance, then what's going on in school, which is often not exactly playful?
Well, schools are set up for conditioning. There are certain aspects of the child we want to train to respond in certain ways through schooling. This is what they call conditioning. Behavior modifications. In each case, we must interrupt the child's real learning process of play in order to bring about these conditionings, which we think they should have. So our entire schooling is set up largely on conditioning, rather than learning in the only way the child can learn, which is through what we as an adult interpret as play. I think this is one of the reasons we find a very small percentage of retention of the conditioning we think we're putting our children through. I remember the Carnegie Institute's famous statement, I think it was the Carnegie Institute back in '63 even, way back then, that a child seems to retain only 3 to 5% of the total information or conditioning modifications we're trying to bring about 3 to 5% retention, whereas that which is learned in a state of play is literally built in as a permanent neural patterning in the brain, which they never lose. If we could just recognize the direct correspondence between play and learning, and the dramatic difference between that and conditioning, and by simply shifting over, I think our entire schooling could be extremely successful and produce, say, 95% retention. But it would have to be within the frame by the way by which nature has set up the learning process in the child.
We have what you call real learning, which occurs in the state of authentic play. And we have training and conditioning and behavior modification. Is there a place for both?
Well, first we have to recognize there are ways in which we must employ conditioning with the child right from the very beginning. There is no doubt of that, particularly in the modern world, where many things have to be off limits to that child. They have to learn that there are certain ways they can move and certain ways they can't, because they'll be killed. I mean, it's just simply not safe. So this is conditioning. But on the other hand, for the child's real openings and all, they must have that world of play established by the adult, establishing that safe, secure space with them. If we mistaken these two, if we get them mixed up and we're not aware of the child's need for the play exercise, as well as the conditioning, if we try to make the play the conditioning, or if we try to condition play, then we're going to mess up the whole neural development itself. If you look at the world of the child of the dream around 3 or 4, when they're beginning to be able to come into dominion over their own structures of knowledge about a world, self, and language and all inside themselves, and want to create these inner worlds and then play them out in their own private world. This is a private world. But here we're worried about the child being socialized, and we think they should all be crammed together to learn to play together. But they don't play together. Each plays in their own private individual world. If they might all have to be sharing the same physical space, but they're not sharing the same mental world space at all. And then if we take the conditioning of schooling and interfere with that early period, making them sit at desks, conditioning their bodies not to move when all learning is sensory motor at that period. All learning of the child from that 4 to 7 period is verbal. They talk out their world all the time. They're always speaking to themselves. That plays a critical part in the whole thing. And suddenly we're making them sit at desks to attend abstract, metaphoric, symbolic structures, restricting their body movement. And we're conditioning them. We're trying to condition that mind, modify those natural behaviors on the part of our adult ideas. Then obviously you're not going to have the foundation laid for the very thing you're after later on in their ability to handle very abstract metaphoric symbolic structures. The same thing with all the stages of play that I can see. We've taken a later adult concept and try to inflict it on the child or impose it on the child out of appropriate age consideration, which then becomes conditioning and blocks the natural unfolding and absorption of their universe as designed by nature during that period.
The state of play with its curiosity and wonder remains the same. What changes is the type of activity which is appropriate for each age. Let's start at the beginning.
If you look at the period, say from 1 to 4, imitation plays a critical role in it. Imitative play. They look at it and they see their parents or their models doing certain things. They want to do the same kinds of activity within their own world. The little jar top becoming the mixing bowl that the mother's using. The little spool of thread becoming the automobile the father is driving, or whatever it might be. Representational objects and metaphoric thinking, symbolic thinking. All to imitate within a small world that they can control and monitor and manage the great, huge adult world that they're preparing themselves for. So this is imitative play, which is the foundations of metaphoric symbolic thought that we use in abstract languages and mathematics and chemical formulas and so on. But then you have a shift. Around 4, what Piaget calls the child of the dream. The great period of intuitive thinking begins, and the creation of internal worlds. No longer just imitative, but now you're using the world you've got established to move within and create other worlds of your own making. And we speak of the child of the dream and their play.